Okay, everyone, thank you so much for attending this conference. You are in room A, which I'm delighted to listen to Sue talk about growing winter spinach for healthy seeds to increase sales, since I do grow winter spinach. And very important, please, I'd like to thank our sponsors. Please give them a look after the conference and see what they have to offer. If it wasn't for them, we couldn't do a lot of this at the great cost that we have it at. And I guess we'll move right on to Sue. Little introduction. Sue's an extension educator with UMass Extension Vegetable Program, where she enjoys working with growers to find solutions to crop and pest management problems and conducting applied research trials on vegetable production and pest management. She holds an MS in plant pathology from Cornell, and she's also getting her PhD. Wow, you're a busy person.
I'm trying. I'm making very slow progress, I'll say.
I'll stop sharing so you can share.
All right, thanks. Hopefully this goes smoothly. You can see my screen there. All right, can you hear me okay? And
you're awesome. Go for it.
Great. Well, thanks for that introduction, Laura. I can skip that part. I was going to ask if folks are already growing some spinach or they're looking to get into growing spinach. I don't know the best way to do this interactively, but maybe
you want to raise your hand if you're a spinach grower. And do we have any want to be's?
Okay. So one person, two people. Jir, are you hoping to start growing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Put me down. I want to grow some more. I'm doing it, but I want to grow. I want to get better at it.
Okay, cool. Well, that's helpful to know. Hopefully you'll find something interesting for all of you. It's kind of a big topic here. I'm sorry, I need to just change my screen around a little bit. There we go. Okay, so we at UMass Extension on the vegetable team, my colleague Genevieve Higgins and I have been working on growing winter spinach for the past 3 years as part of a Northeast SARE grant. And our project was looking at different production systems and how profitable different systems were, and also looking at some disease management. So first, the question is, why grow greens in winter? It seems like demand for fresh produce, fresh greens in winter is just huge. And can be very lucrative. We see it selling for $14 a pound in the market. Other reasons people are interested in growing in the winter is to have more year-round revenue and to provide opportunities for employees to have year-round work and just keeping customers year-round. Also, if you do winter markets on stuff, if you have greens, people might be attracted to your booth, where then you could sell more carrots and sweet potatoes and other root storage crops. But it's not going to be for everyone. Not everyone wants to be growing in winter. And a lot of folks feel this barrier to entry. Just, is it worth it to invest? And how to get started. So people are doing this all kinds of different ways. If you can see my mouse, there are these more simple low tunnels that were you could cover spinach that's planted in the fall in the field. There are small tunnels, large drive-through tunnels. So lots of different types of infrastructure, labor inputs. So production is really all over the place. People are also doing other greens, lettuces, brassica greens. Some folks are direct seeding and others are transplanting. Some are using added heat or covers or not. So a big question with growing crops in the winter is, what are their nitrogen needs? There's the assumption that the nitrogen would be less available at cold temperature. It's mineralized by microbes in the soil, which, are likely dormant for most of the winter. So it's really all over the board what people are doing as far as fertilizing. What we have been doing is taking soil tests before planting, including the nitrate. So that is just a checkbox on your standard soil test that you could include, and that is nitrate is the available form of nitrogen. Nitrogen nitrate is very mobile in the soil, so you have to do this nitrate test to track what is going to be actually available for the crop. So what we do is add fertilizer up front, and we really just use the amount of fertilizer based on the soil test that is recommended for spinach. Some people are adding like up to 10 times that amount, but we haven't found that to be necessary. And then you end up with like a lot of extra at the end of the season when it does warm up. But we do continue to take nitrate tests. This is the pre-sidedress nitrate test, PSNT. So that it's like $25, I think, at the UMass Soil Lab. And it just tells you the available nitrogen. And if it's below 30 ppm, then you need to add more nitrogen. And not everyone has this luxury, but we have overhead irrigation and we have frost-free hydrants, so we can fertigate. So we use calcium nitrate through the overhead irrigation if the crop needs a little extra nitrogen. Since there's a lot of people here who are new to growing winter spinach, I think what most people are doing is, just putting down a lot of extra fertilizer up front, and it's just kind of slowly mineralizing over the season. You do need to water the spinach, so having some way to get water when it's frozen outside. So that is a consideration. I think with winter spinach, the bed prep is really important, especially if you're direct seeding. Spinach is pretty finicky. It doesn't like it too wet or too dry. If you have low spots, you get a lot of wet. It doesn't like its roots to be wet, and you can get nutrient leaching here. It's also particular about the pH, so trying to keep the pH near 7. And anything you can do to improve the uniformity of the bed is going to be really beneficial if you're direct seeding, especially. So this is kind of how we do it. This is me spreading fertilizer. We use this roller, and that helps us get good contact with the seed. You could use these push seeders. This is a more highly mechanized seeder here. This is one of those tunnels that tractors can just drive right through. And then a lot of folks are transplanting. So often in these tunnels, we're growing tomatoes or cucumbers over the summer. So if you want to leave those crops in there as long as possible, you might start the spinach as transplants. You could start them in September and plant them out in October. So this is a tunnel with transplants planted October 20th. The earlier you plant, the more yield you'll get over the season. But you can seed as late as mid to late October, direct seeded, and you'll still get 2 or 3 harvests. But I think if you want to, we'll get to this later. I always get ahead of myself. Obviously, more plants means more yield. So this is the seeding density that we use. It comes out to about 3 million seeds per acre. So it's a very close seeding rate, but it makes a nice product in the end. In this tunnel, there's quite a lot of unutilized space in here. If you have too many plants, you can, promote disease, but at the same time, this is sort of high value space. So you want to get the most out of it. So these are different ways people harvest. Here's someone harvesting by hand, leaf by leaf, leaving the center of the plant. So the growing tip is left intact and the leaves aren't torn. Sorry. This is how we harvest. We just clear cut everything like you would other greens in the field, and the growing point is left here and it'll regrow. Here's sort of a drill powered handheld, harvester for something a little more mechanized. And then here's highly mechanized. This is conveyor harvester, and these buckets follow along behind. You can see it here. So again, just a really big range. You can do this at any scale, hand tools or tractor tools. And the marketing, again, is there's a big wholesale market. I think grocery stores are carrying spinach, local spinach, restaurants, retail, CSAs, anywhere you normally harvest. Of course, washing things in winter is not the most fun thing in the world, and you need a place where you can do that. Any questions so far before I jump into this sort of economic comparison of different farms?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. It looks like from your pictures, most people are growing a smooth leaf lettuce. Is it an advantage to do that over Savoy lettuce?
So I'd say people are looking for something with a little bit of Savoy, just because if it's too flat, it sticks together in the bag and doesn't look very appealing, but it's not super Savoy. And these are kind of like baby leaf lettuce, I would say, not so much like braising lettuce or spinach. That makes sense.
Sorry, I started you on the lettuce thing.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, just because if you read the seed catalogs, things like Bloomsdale are recommended for winter, and they're heavily Savoyed. And I just wondered if that was
So I will get it later to a bunch of variety trial work that we have done and some recommended varieties, why we recommend them. All right, so we wanted to look at, across all of this variability, was this enterprise profitable, and what were the variables that impacted the profitability the most? So we developed these spreadsheets to help farms keep track of the time it took to do various activities, and calculated everything out. So I will show you what we found. The first farm is the least mechanized. Everything was done by hand. This was how they prepared the beds in the tunnel, and it's a smaller structure. And it was marketed through their CSA. They have a regular season CSA, and they decided to do like a winter spinach add-on for a set amount. So their price per pound ended up being pretty low compared to other like wholesale markets. They didn't use any machinery, so it was kind of cheaper on that side, no running tractors or anything. And they had 80 plants per square foot. They harvested for 19 weeks starting in late September, or they seeded in September, so they direct seeded. I'm going to show them individually and then kind of compare them side by side. The next farm is sort of in the middle. They distributed mostly through wholesale and a little retail at farmers markets. Their price per pound was $10.25 on average. They use tractors to turn over the beds, and they use transplants. So they use tractors to transplant things, and I think they had some other bed prep stuff that they did in here, so we added that cost. They had a much lower plant density, but this farm, they seeded in early September and transplanted these in October. And the reason for that is they do a lot of high tunnel tomatoes, and they want to leave the tomatoes in there as long as possible, but they also wanted to meet the Thanksgiving markets. So they first started harvesting in November compared to the previous farm, which started in December. They had more labor to do all of the transplanting. They also use row cover, so taking that on and off adds some labor. I didn't mention this in the sort of production section, but it's not totally necessary to do this for spinach. Spinach is freeze tolerant, so it can actually be completely frozen. You have to wait until it thaws to touch it or harvest it, but it can freeze and thaw and freeze and thaw, and it just gets sweeter and sweeter. If it gets below a certain temperature, which is pretty low, and I should have written it down, but you might want to cover it on like a very cold night. But in general, the covers actually trap moisture in and can lead to more disease and abrasion and stuff. So it's not necessary for the most part. Lettuces and other things do need to be covered, but not spinach. They also had a high production cost because they grew the transplants. So they had the trays and all of that associated with that. And again, the row cover. And then we had a very big, very mechanized spinach operation. They specialize in winter spinach. It's all they do. So for them, it makes sense to invest in a lot more equipment and structures that they can get the equipment into. So they wholesale most of the crop, and their price was similar to the last farm. They had more equipment costs running a bed former and they also flame weed before the spinach pops up. And then they have the mechanical harvester going through there. So they have a lot more plants in per square foot. They seeded October 12th, but they had some issue, I think a disease. And so they started over and reseeded October 25th. So if you seed later, there will be a longer lag before your first harvest period. But so here they had a very low labor cost and low cost of materials. So if we look at them side by side, this is farm 1, 2, and 3. And I'll just point out, yeah, so obviously the highly mechanized farm had lower labor. The middle farm had a significantly more production materials cost because of that transplanting and row cover. This farm, the first farm, really probably could have charged a lot more for their spinach. But when we look at the yield, this was a little surprising. This when I'm comparing the pounds per square foot, so they're all even. They had different size tunnels, so the yield in the highly mechanized tunnel with lots more plants didn't end up being having more yield. And the reason for that is they had a disease come through, and they normally would have gotten 3 harvests, but they only got 2 because the crop was not marketable. But if they had harvested that 3rd time, they would have been more profitable. Stands to reason, but I just thought this was interesting. It's sort of like quantifying the cost of that disease. But the so I think this first farm, if they had charged more, they were getting pretty good yield and sales, and they weren't that profitable because they didn't charge enough, I think. But let's see. And so this profit per square foot, I think 1.8 is the estimated profit for high tunnel tomatoes. So you can think of it as being at least as profitable as tomatoes. So, and no matter what system you're using. So just some things that we took away from this. If you are, a lot of farms can plant more densely. If you increase the size that you're harvesting, that's a quick way to increase your yield. Just let it get a little bit bigger. We harvest by clear cutting. I think this is a big cost savings, labor savings. Make sure you're getting a good price. So $10 per pound wholesale is a good price. And at the retail stand, it's routinely $7 a bag or $7 a half pound, so $14 a pound. If you don't need to like really maximize your tomato season, direct seeding is a labor saving practice. And then choose your varieties so that you are not so susceptible to disease coming through. And that will sort of lead me into the next part of the talk. Oh yeah, A lot of the varieties that we have been trialing, this is related to just the clear cutting. I think a lot of folks are worried about, the next harvest not looking very neat. But we find that some varieties, this is like a varietal trait that we can quantify how well they recut. So here's one that looks kind of scraggly, and this one I'd say looks pretty neat. And it just has to do with the habit of the plant. And so we take that into consideration in our variety trials. The last thing is, I took this picture just the other day. In our area here, I'm at the UMass Amherst campus in the Pioneer Valley. And when we started this project, we always would say, there's no limit to the market for fresh local greens in winter. And I don't know, I think now there's enough people doing this on a big enough scale that it's worth looking around and making sure that you have a market for this crop before you invest big in. It's a good practice no matter what you're thinking of adding to your farm enterprise, but I don't know, you may have reached peak spinach here in the valley. So I was going to transition now to talk about some of the pest management, including some trials that we've done at UMass. Are there any questions so far? Okay. So first I'll talk about some insect pests and weeds and then get into the disease stuff. And feel free to interrupt me as you go if you have questions. You can just shout them out or put them in the chat. So the first pest we'll talk about is the aphids, and these are, I think, becoming more common as people are growing in these tunnels year round. So there's always something for them to be eating. So these like more broad range aphid species are hanging out in these tunnels, and they prefer hanging out down in the crown of the plant where the growing tip is, and they just kind of infest the harvested crop. They're hard to wash off, and they're just a contaminant in your crop. Really, if the population's really high, they can distort the leaves and they get crinkled and crunched. And there are some conventional and organic insecticides you could use. A lot of times in a tunnel, people use ladybugs and parasitoids in greenhouses and high tunnels, but they are not active below 50 degrees. So really the best practice is to make sure you clean a crop. Like if you have cucumbers in the tunnel and they're covered in aphids, you know you're going to be having a problem at some point in the winter season. So kind of want to get it under control before you put a new crop in, and before it gets cold. So we scout often and use a threshold of 1 aphid per leaf. So, and then these are the various materials you could spray for organic growers: soaps, oils, azadirachtin, or Micotrol could work. Cutworms are a big problem. And again, becoming, yep.
Can I ask you more about the aphids?
Yes.
What a problem I have. So I had them come to me. It was last week. They were all in my kale, and I just ripped all the kale out of the greenhouse because I thought I was going to be able to handle it, and they just kept coming.
Yeah.
So I have raised beds in this particular greenhouse. So are those aphids like in the soil? Like how long do I need to wait, or what can I put into that soil, or do I have to get totally new soil?
Yeah, it's a good question. Where are they coming from? Do you know what species of aphid they are?
No,
Yeah.
rotten ones.
So, yeah, they could be hanging out in the soil or somewhere in the greenhouse, and they I don't know, it doesn't seem like reasonable to get new soil. But really just staying on top of it, maybe you could get some sticky cards.
Okay.
And identifying the species of aphid can help, because then you could get a parasitoid that will attack it. In the spring, you could get ladybugs in there. And I think you want to just prevent them from building up. So I think often, are you an organic grower?
Not certified, but I don't use chemicals.
Okay. Well, the oils and soaps are good because they can kind of just like help wash the aphids off. Like even just watering dislodges a lot of them, but if you add soap or oil to that, that can help. It might be worth, since you have this soil, the Bovaria bassiana, this is a fungus that attacks aphids, and its use is kind of limited because it needs to be protected from UV rays and it needs to be kept moist. But in the soil is actually like a great environment for this thing to maybe go after some of the aphids that are there. So I would consider letting some microtrol go after it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so cutworms are blowing up in these tunnels. They seem to like hanging out in the tunnels where, again, there's like always stuff for them to eat. They usually feed at night, so you don't necessarily see them, but you start seeing these kind of ragged, large holes in the leaves. Like, where did this come from? If you look around in the soil, you might see them hanging out, or if you go out at night with a flashlight, you might find them that way. So there's not a lot of, there's not a lot known about them. Like, we're not sure exactly which species they are, but there are a bunch of different cutworms that they could be, and they're caterpillars. So things that are labeled for killing caterpillars can work as long as the spinach crop is on the label. So, and trust is one that's commonly used for killing caterpillars. That's organic. But there's also a form of it that comes as a little pellet. It's called seduce, and you just sprinkle it on the soil, and the caterpillars are attracted to it and they eat it and die. So it's that's what I used this year, and it seemed to really knock them back. The BT toxins are specific for caterpillars, and those should work well. And then there's several other materials for any conventional growers out there listening. Those are the two main insect pests. Do folks have questions about other insects? Chickweed is a major problem. It is a winter annual, which means that it germinates at colder soil temperature, like when spinach is growing. So here is a crop that's totally infested with chickweed. So just because of the nature of chickweed, it grows well in the cold, and so outcompetes other weeds and spinach. So there's a few like new, or maybe not even that new, but just there's a lot of interest in some of these practices to kill pathogens and weed seeds in the soil in the tunnel. So one is solarization, where you put this just greenhouse plastic over the soil. You have to get it moist and then cover the soil with plastic and kind of seal the edges. And then you have to leave it in there for 4 to 6 weeks during the summer so that it gets to be 120 or hotter for 4 to 6 weeks. So really the time that you can do that in New England is August, maybe September. So it means taking your tunnel out of production for that time, but it can kill weeds and pathogens in the top couple inches of soil. There's anaerobic soil disinfestation, which you add a sugar source and then again tarp the soil for 4 to 5 weeks. And that's supposed to stimulate microbial activity and somehow kill pathogens. I'd say if you're interested in this one, do some research. There's a lot of resources out there on it. I personally don't know too much about it. It seems, again, to be kind of a really big time commitment, so I haven't paid too much attention to it. I think another one that's a little more promising for us is steaming. So colleague at UVM has been looking at this in Vermont, and these are her pictures. So there's this propane steamer unit. It's a couple $1,000s. And you bury these lines under this tarp, and it heats the soil to 140 degrees and kills, again, weed seeds and pathogens in the top 2 to 4 inches of soil. But it's pretty quick process, and you can see the results here are pretty compelling. That's all I wanted to say about weeds. Any questions about that?
The plastic that was laid out in the high tunnel, that was just regular clear greenhouse plastic?
Here, it looks to be more like a tarp. She has a lot of resources on this. I think it's part of the SARE project. So if you want to read more, I can find some resources, but also they're on the UVM page. I would just Google that.
What the previous photo?
Oh, this one?
Yes, the one on the left.
Yeah. I'm not sure what kind of tarp it is. To me, it looks.
It doesn't look like the black on
I
one
think
side,
this
silver on
picture is before they've tarped it. So they've put some white stuff down, and then they're tilling it in, and then they're going to tarp it with clear plastic again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's folks at Penn State that are looking at this. You could, again, follow their work there, or I could quickly look it up at the end and put it in the chat. So now for the diseases, let's check the time. Okay. So the first one you'll encounter is damping off, and here's a picture of post-emergence damping off, where you see this little seedling has been killed There's also pre-emergence damping off, which is like you don't even see anything emerge and it looks like you just have a really bad stand. And the last picture, this is Rhizoctonia, could be called web blight, maybe here. But generally there's just like several pathogens that are ubiquitous in the soil that can cause these kind of symptoms, and collectively they're called damping off. And typically the management recommendations are to avoid seeding too densely or too deeply, and keeping the soil moisture even. Some of these do well in dry soil and some pathogens do well in wet soil, but just keeping the soil moisture even. These pathogens are kind of opportunistic. They prey on weak or slow growing plants. So like when you seed too deeply, the plant is struggling, spending all of its energy growing up through the soil, and it's just a weaker plant, and things like that. So anything you can do to get the seedlings growing quickly and healthy. And part of that is soil microbial health. So when we're growing constantly in these high tunnels and tilling, adding lots of different amendments, it's not raining in there, we're using often like town water. The pathogens kind of build up and the good microbes are depleted. So adding compost and rotating crops, and also cover cropping is like what we would normally recommend in the field, or like fallowing a field. But these tunnels are high value space, so people don't want to leave them empty. But so there are a bunch of biopesticides, things like trichoderma, streptomyces, bacillus products that you can use. We looked at these in 2014 and were not impressed particularly by any of them. I'm going to try and go a little quicker because I have probably too much, as I usually do. But we wanted to look at this question of, can you cover crop in these tunnels, and would that reduce the damping off and improve stand? So in 2021, we grew high tunnel cucumbers on half the tunnel, and this is a buckwheat cover crop on the other side. And then we mowed it and tilled it in, and we removed all the cucumber material and pulled it out. And so we were comparing cover cropped and not cover cropped, and we were going to evaluate the stand of spinach on both sides. But we also were wondering if we could speed up the germination of the seeds by priming. And there's evidence that priming impacts different varieties differently. So we also looked at 2 different varieties. So we had 2 varieties, primed or unprimed, and cover cropped or no cover cropped, and 4 replicates of each. And what we found was, there's a lot here, but the green ones are the cover cropped side, and you can see that they had really high uniform germination in all of those, whether they were primed or not, or which variety. On the uncover cropped side, there was an effect of priming, but the primed seeds actually germinated worse than the unprimed seed. And the variety cross-track was much stronger variety than Colibri. So that was, and I'll show you some pictures of what this looked like. So since the priming didn't work, we'll kind of drop that. So these are pictures of Colibri with no cover crop before planting and cover crop before planting. So it was a really big effect. And we were kind of surprised, but it did hold. And so again, cover crop didn't really make a difference on the germination of crosstrack. It's just a more vigorous variety. But this was the plot vigor before harvesting. So by that time, kind of the cover crop did make a difference, even for the crosstrack. And it held true for the yield as well. So we had much greater yield from the cover cropped plots, no matter what variety it was. So this was our hypothesis, but it also surprised us how strong of an effect there was. And then we went back and thought, well, what else was different? There was kind of a lot different about how we managed these two sides of the tunnel, and maybe it wasn't just the cover crop. And in fact, we fertilized these differently. When we planted the cucumbers in June of 2022, we added some fertilizer to just the bed where the cucumbers were. We didn't add fertilizer to this side. So in October, that's when we kind of, the light bulbs went off, and we took a PSNT and measured the nitrate, and there was twice as much available nitrogen on this side as on this side. So you can think we grew a lot of cucumbers and removed all these cucumbers and the plant material from that side. Whereas on this side, we didn't add any extra nitrogen, but we didn't take any away. We grew buckwheat until the back end. So that might also explain why that side did better. So you could say, why is she telling us about this if it was kind of like, oops, we just fertilized it more? Well, we're still monitoring, we're still using this tunnel, and we've tried to correct for this and bring this side up. So we've added nitrogen to this side and not this side. And this side keeps going up and up and up and up. It's now up to 75 parts per million nitrate, which is pretty high. And this side is still down at like 40. So there's like a legacy of this management. And I bring it up because whatever you do in this tunnel, it does have an impact that can last a long time. And we see that because high tunnel soils are, their nutrients and pH get really out of whack. And this simple thing of like cover cropping once is having this long lasting impact on the mineralization. So this is what I think is happening. We had been, adding fertilizer, adding compost to this tunnel each time we grew crop in there. And we were tilling and depleting the soil. And now that we've fed the good microbes some green manure, I think they're just active in there. It's just a more active soil on this cover cropped side. And so there's more bacteria mineralizing all of that nitrogen that had been waiting to be released in there. So we're gonna, I hope to continue this work and kind of tease apart, was it just an impact of nitrogen, or is there something to the cover crop that gave us that better stand and better yield? Any questions about that? I know I'm just about out of time.
Yeah, not about that topic, but about the picture. Sometimes I see the sides rolled up and sometimes they're down. Were you trying to regulate the highest temperature the high tunnel could get?
Yep, we have this, there's this box back here. So this automatically rolls up incrementally when it reaches a certain set temperature. So for us, I think it's 50.
Wow.
So if it heats up to 50, the louvers on the top will open and the fans will come on. And then 3 minutes later, if it's still 50, it'll roll up a foot and then another foot and another foot. So yeah, that's automatic roll up sides. The last piece I was gonna, well, I had a lot more. Sorry, I should have managed my time better. So I don't know if there were things that you guys were really hoping to hear about. I had something about hot water seed treatment. Starting with clean seed is important. This is cladosporium, another disease that is becoming really prominent in these winter tunnels because it does well at low temperature. And here is a seed germinating that is covered in cladosporium seed or spores. So if you have a small amount of seed, hot water seed treatment might be a good idea. I have some instructions how to do it yourself. We also offer it as a service at UMass, so you can send us your seed and we'll treat it for you. With the advent and popularity of these sous vide sticks, they keep a constant temperature. So I think it's gotten easier to do at home. But the idea is you have to kill the pathogens on or in the seed. And there are different protocols for different seed. You can really only do this for small seeded crops because you'd have to heat a big seed like a bean seed. You'd have to heat it way too much in order to kill something on the inside of that seed. And the seed would then not be viable. So we treat small seeded crops like brassicas and tomatoes and peppers most commonly, but spinach is definitely one that this would work. And slightly different protocol for all these, but all this stuff is on our website, or Meg McGrath at Cornell has done a lot on this too. We just put them in these like little mesh packets, and then when they're done, you put them in a dehydrator with no heat, just a fan, or otherwise dry the seeds out. And once you've treated them, you should use them within that season, but you don't have to use them right away. And then I told you I was going to get to some variety stuff. So I'll just say we do these variety trials for spinach downy mildew, which looks like this. It's an emerging disease, and the best way to manage it is by planting varieties that are resistant. And so we're working on trying to get the seed distributors more aware of this problem. And like I mentioned, we look at germination and we look at regrowing. Again, this is what it looks like. When we did that cover cropping study, we were using Crosstrack, and I kept saying it was so vigorous, but there's a bunch of other ones that germinated even better. This is this year's data. So these are some of our favorite varieties in the past couple of years, and they're resistant to lots of strains of downy mildew. They look good. They have a little bit of Savoy. They grow nice and upright, so they're easy to harvest, and they regrow nicely too. And that's where I'll leave it. Sorry for running out of time there, but
there's just so much. Thank you so much. And
this is our project website, so you can find more resources. We have a lot of like research reports and stuff. And then this is a spinach production in California is just like how to grow spinach. And we learned a lot reading that. So is there any other questions?
all of this information will be available to everyone who was in the conference. So I really want to pick apart some of these slides. So thank you. James, I think I heard Shannon say Friday it'll go out in an email.
Yes, we're hoping by the end of this week to have all the recordings and follow-up information out to registrants.
Awesome.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just have a couple slides to share. Okay. Yeah, we like to keep these conversations going. So we have a few events that are coming up in March, which I can't believe is this week. And we have some Twilight events that are going to be happening. So keep an eye on your emails. And please let us know what you thought of this conference so that we need it as CMAP because we get grant money to make this happen. And best of all, when you turn in your survey, you can get a prize and you get to pick which one you'd like. I've already started mine. Did I miss anything, James?
No, I don't think so. I just think, as we already said, like, thank you first to Sue for leading us in this final workshop session of the day. And thank you again to all of our presenters, some of whom are in the room now, folks who've presented throughout the day, and anyone who's a part of the day and for being here and all of that. Thank you all. Again, these things only happen when folks from all across our network and all across our community are pitching in and a part of it. None of this is doable without everything you all are doing, the great work you do in the fields and in your spaces everywhere. So thank you all for being here, being a part of this, all of that. Yeah, I don't know. I would say thank you for another 5 minutes if it made sense, but I'll stop myself there because I think the point has been made.
Hey, I want to say thank you. This was my first one of these conferences, and I've learned so much. And this spinach over winter growing was just phenomenal. We have grown it, but without really thinking much about it, and it's very profitable. And we have it in a 30 by 72 feet high tunnel, and it is the best thing that we could grow in the winter. And Susan, you are just really very helpful and inspiring because now I feel more confident about how to take care of that of the high tunnel as we go forward. And and
great.
everything was just great. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Glad to hear it. Yeah, it's so nice growing something I think it's nice to get your hands dirty and have something to grow.
And it's $10 a pound on wholesale. It's like at a minimum, that's what I found.
Yeah, that's great.
Sue, I don't know what I was attending. I've listened to you talk about winter spinach before. I learned so much and I still learned more today. You helped me so much.
Great. Thanks. It's good to hear. Well, thanks for coming.